Welcome back. Say hello on Twitter at Richard Serrett, the website strangeplanet.ca. Angela Thomas, psychic, clairvoyant, and remote viewer, is next, and she'll share some of her personal experiences and paranormal events, which include uninvited spirit communications, psychic visions, precognitive dreaming, hauntings, and much more. And that conversation begins right after this timeout on Coast to Coast AM. As a top psychic in the United States, Angela Thomas has a full body of work, including teaching online psychic development, such as the Psychic Development Masterclass series, and psychic forensics with remote viewing and criminal casework, tracking missing persons workshop. She participates in mass media with television, radio, and publishing. She is a subject participant in an elite consciousness research study focusing on precognition, and has gained an enviable reputation for her psychic work in private sessions for individuals, business leaders, and celebrities. Her work has also included crime victim location and recovery, and she's a vocal advocate for related causes. She's an evangelist for professionalism, standardization, and integrity in the psychic services industry, and her brand new book is This Psychic Life, a collection of personal stories. Angela Thomas, welcome to Coast AM. How are you?
Hello, Richard. Thank you. I'm doing wonderful.
Great. Let's talk about your participation in this this study on precognition. Tell me more about it.
Well, it is the study is actually conducted by a very famous scientist slash medical person. He's got 10 degrees, half in science, half in medicine, specializes in the brain. And anyway, I'm one of 8 people that he studies. So what he does is he asks for, particular predictions, and generally that is on world predictions, of course. And you have to give that back to him in like a very scientific format. So you cannot generalize on anything, really. So I've been involved with that for probably a good 16, 17 years.
Wow, that's a long study.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure that, he publishes the results and things of that nature, but I don't know if he constantly continues it up or if he just wants to see how close things are becoming, for things that he anticipates himself. So I know I've received some private phone calls from him saying, could you look at this or can you read upon this subject? Because I just received a phone call from, let's say, Brazil, and this is what's going on. What do you get on it? So anyway, yeah, very, very wonderful study.
And was he a skeptic when he started this study, or does he believe in psychic abilities?
No, he actually believes in psychic abilities, and he would not have gotten into the study itself just to try to disprove psychic abilities. Being the scientist that he is, and the medical doctor, he even looked at fMRIs to see how the brain functions in a psychic when that psychic is receiving psychic information.
Can you tell me more about that? I mean, what lobes or parts of the brain are activated when you're making your predictions or receiving visions?
I'm not the expert in the brain, but I can tell you that we've talked a lot about the prefrontal cortex. And to me, as a psychic, I would love to go, hey, let's do an fMRI on me. Not for the precognition so much because, I try to stay within an 18-month time frame of any psychic prediction that I give, whether that's personal or world prediction. But I would like to see, an fMRI when I'm using telepathy or when I'm using third eye or when I am using even retrocognition, which is the ability to go back in the past. And so I feel that the brain or the mind, the brain and the mind are connected, but they're still not the same, right?
No,
so I feel like I feel differently, or the way that I think or the way that I shift in states of consciousness, depending on, again, what time, if it's past, present, or near future. So I would love to see that. Now, I'm sure there are scientists out there that are doing, physical tests like fMRIs on psychics and clairvoyants and mediums. So, I guess to see, what's coming through. I know many psychic mediums are, tested for when they are, communicating with one in spirit. So I know that they frequently test. So anyway, yeah, it's a big, to me, it's a big responsibility, especially when I put out world predictions. And I do put some of those predictions, of course, in a more synopsis of the prediction on my website. So there is, if you go to psychicangelathomas.com, and you'll see a menu, and underneath that you'll see predictions. So I do like to publish some of those, but of course I don't publish all of them, Richard, because not all of them would be, palatable for the masses, or I feel like it would be too negative or too extreme, or even cause certain, let's say, individuals that are politicians or leaders, I feel like it would make them more vulnerable.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if I gave a personal prediction about you, and I go, that's kind of questionable whether or not I should make that public, then, it puts somebody at jeopardy. So, again, you go back to, it's a huge responsibility, I believe. And even reading for individuals is a huge responsibility. So, I teach online psychic development, and I talk to the students on day one about that responsibility and using ethics and things of that nature, because I am not a fan of psychic scammers. But going back to reading for individuals, it's such a great responsibility, because people normally do not contact psychics unless there's something really pressing or very important. You may occasionally have somebody that, gets a session with the psychic for entertainment value, but that's very rare.
If it's bad news, and again, you don't want to state it publicly, but if you're doing a private reading with someone and it's bad news, let's say you foresee their untimely death, how do you handle that?
Well, number one, I don't tell them. I don't tell them that, hey, I see, something coming up that, you're not going to make it. And a lot of times, or most of the time, I am not going to get that information. What I will get is that John or Jane Doe has a life threat hanging over their head. And so if I know, let's say if it's a medical condition, and I'm not a physician, and I let them know, listen, I'm not a medical professional. However, I am getting a little bit of information about, I'll just use the heart, for example. So, it would be a good idea, should you decide to see a cardiologist, right? So I kind of lead them to, like, please, please, please. I don't tell them what to do ever. I just give the information. But I do try to encourage them, if it's a medical situation that, I know that could, if there's a life threat hanging over their head, I want John or Jane Doe to go, but I can't say, listen, you need to book book your appointment as soon as possible. But I do try to lead them there. As far as any sort of negative message like death or something of this nature, I'm not one that likes to venture into fear and anxiety. If I told somebody, I'll just say, for an example, a car accident. I see you in a car accident. Well, between now and the next 18 months or now to the next 3 months or whatever, that individual is going to be in fear and anxiety like, oh, my gosh, Angela said I would, get into this horrific accident. So that places them in a state of mind that should never, ever happen. But, you hear about a lot of psychic scammers that will tell somebody, hey, John Doe, I see a car accident coming up. And now he's in fear and anxiety. And then that scammer will say, but if you buy my, candle for $700, or you rent, now there are psychic scammers that will rent a crystal. If you rent my crystal for $500, I promise you can avoid this accident.
That's a red flag. That should be a red flag.
It's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Huge.
What percentage of psychics actually have ability? And I don't know if there's any way of gauging this. And what percentage do you think have no ability or very little, and they're scammers, as you say?
Well, here's the thing. It is very hard to gauge, who is and who isn't, because we do not know about all of the psychics that have not gone public. There are still psychics out there that say, hey, listen, Richard, don't tell anybody that you had a session with me. I don't want anybody to know, of my special ability. But I'm going to rank it high, and you may call me crazy, but throughout my many years as a psychic, I am going to say that now with the Internet that there's a good 85% of people online that are nothing more than scammers. Now, let me break that psychic scammer statement up as well. So we have one, the psychic scammer that intentionally lies. John Doe, rent my crystal for a week and you can avoid the car accident, or get another session with me next week and, you can avoid it, or so on, so on. Then you have the psychic scammers that have maybe read or flipped through a book or, watched some videos on YouTube or whatever, and then they call themselves a psychic and they charge money to somebody and they don't even know what they're doing. They're not really using their abilities. They may give John or Jane Doe their opinion, right, or advice. And you don't want to hire a psychic to give you an opinion or advice because you can get that elsewhere.
So let me ask you about some predictions. We have this horrible situation in the Middle East. Israel has declared war on Hamas.
Yes.
I'm on the website. Back in August of 2022, you predicted the conflict between Israel and Palestine escalates. World leaders attempt to intervene and offset the inevitable. And here we are, August, Saturday, Israel declaring war on Hamas. Horrible situation. Where do you see that going? Is this going to escalate? Is it going to spread?
Quite frankly, Richard, it is a toss-up, right? But I do feel like it will be spreading because I will just say this, that I feel like there's a lot of two-headed snakes involved in that whole situation. It does not take a psychic to say that area is just prime of launching another world war, because Muslims are obligated, no matter where they live in the world, to offset what they would, call, the non-Muslims names or whatever, but, they're their automatic religious enemy. So I do see it spreading, and even though the United States has, the Biden administration had, said they're going to support Israel, their friend, at the same time, they just sent days before millions or billions of dollars to Palestine. So the United States is literally funding one of the funders of this war. But to answer your question, I do see it spreading very quickly if no one of significance can step in and stop it immediately. And I just don't see that happening. Let's just say hypothetically, if some leader stepped in and said, listen, let's just make this a peace treaty. Let's stop this nonsense before we light up the entire Middle East. I don't feel like that's going to last very long. I do feel like Iran is in there helping Hamas. The United States is helping Hamas to attack their own. Publicly, they say it's, we're friends with Israel, but, we're not really, not this administration anyway. So long story short, that really does concern me. And, of course, we have the Russia and the Chinese or China's influence going on. I do not, now hear what I just said, Richard, I do not feel that Putin is the instigator in this whole Ukrainian situation. I feel like the man has a lot of patience. And, I'm not saying he's a wonderful man, right? It's not somebody you want to invite for dinner. Have a friendly chit-chat with Putin. But he is a phenomenal strategist and leader, and he's very knowledgeable. And so we're not getting everything that's truly going on with that situation. But going back to Russia and going back to China, the world has changed, and the shift of power has changed. And so, we need to knock on wood that Russia and or China is not going to be led or drugged into or forced to attack the United States.
All right, Angela, we're approaching the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a time out, come back, and discuss further. Psychic clairvoyant, remote viewer, Angela Thomas. This Psychic Life, a collection of personal stories, is the brand new book right here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. An eerie video out of Argentina shows a puzzling white anomaly near the spot where a car accident took the life of a famous singer in the country, and some suspect that the curious form could be his ghost. According to a local media report, famed musician Huguito Flores tragically perished in a head-on crash while en route to perform at a festival last month. A few days after his unexpected passing, a motorist traveling by the scene of the accident, where the truck which struck his vehicle remained, looked over at the spot and noticed something unusual at the site. To the driver's surprise, a ghostly anomaly appeared next to the wrecked truck on the side of the highway, and as the motorist passed the scene, the oddity seemingly vanished into thin air. Check out the video and judge for yourself. It's in the carousel up at coasttocoastam.com. If you like what you hear from me tonight, this morning, please consider visiting my website, strangeplanet.ca, strangeplanet.ca. There you can stream and subscribe to my podcast, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. New episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. And if you want to get deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to think about a premium subscription. There are 3 subscriber tiers to choose from. Choose the one that's right for you. You get access to things like commercial-free listening, a free subscription to my monthly newsletter, bonus episodes, discounts on Strange Planet merchandise, and more. Strangeplanet.ca. Strangeplanet.ca. Back to more of my conversation with psychic remote viewer Angela Thomas right here on Coast to Coast AM. Angela Thomas is with us. The book is This Psychic Life, a collection of personal stories. There's a story in the book, Angela, about a man who attended his own funeral.
Yes.
Unpack this one for us.
Well, I have to say that was my first time of seeing a full apparition. And, a lot of people report apparitions as, oh, I didn't see the feet, or they were a little clear, they weren't full-bodied. But I had a family friend and a gentleman that, was the grandfather of some friends that I went to school with. And I got to know him. And, Richard, one of the things about this man was that he loved cars. So he could tell you the schematics of, all of these cars and models and so on and so forth. So every time that I would go to visit, he talked about cars. So fast forward, I get a phone call that he has passed. So I go to the funeral home for the the viewing of the body and to pay my last respects. And I did so. And so his stepdaughter said, hey, let's go back in the break room. And back then you could get coffee at a funeral home, and you could vending machines, you could even smoke inside, right? So we went back into the break room, and this room had windows that faced out into the parking lot. So at one point, I'm standing in front of the window, just kind of gazing out. Beautiful day, by the way, beautiful. And all of a sudden, I see the man, my friend who has died, and I paid my last respects to. He is walking around in the parking lot, and he's checking out the cars. Like bending over, looking at the tires and, license plates and all this. Okay. So I said, oh, my God. And I heard his stepdaughter's voice, who, by the way, had a Panamanian accent. I didn't turn around, but she said, oh, something like, don't worry, Angie, that's his twin brother.
Oh.
And so I just thought, oh, okay, I didn't know he had a twin brother. So several years after that incident, I went out to the Phoenix, Arizona area to visit the stepdaughter, and I asked, well, how is his twin brother doing? And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, don't you remember you said, don't worry, Angie, it's just his twin brother? And she said, I never said that. Now, he does have a twin sister. But
What the heck? What happened?
He was there. He attended his own, memorial at the funeral home. And I'm sure he went along for the ride to the actual cemetery.
Well, why did his stepdaughter say that then? Why did she say that's his twin?
She didn't say it.
Oh, you misinterpreted?
What I believe happened was that spirits have the ability to mimic anything they want to. So I feel like a spirit used her voice to tell me, don't worry, Angie, it's just his twin brother. Again, I didn't turn around when she said that
to
engage in the conversation. So yeah, it was. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I had no idea. But to look at this man in the parking lot would be as if I were looking at you walking around in a parking lot. I'm
Totally
talking
solid.
about full body solid. Yes.
Did you happen to notice? Was he wearing the same suit that he was decked out in the casket?
No, he was not. He was not.
Are psychics often able to see apparitions, ghosts, spirits, or are they mutually? I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. What I'm saying is, if you are psychic, are you more likely to see ghosts, apparitions?
Well, I think that there is, that more psychics versus someone that is not as has strong abilities. I feel like they have a little bit more ability to see it. But the thing is that most psychics do not walk around seeing spirits. Most of the time, spirits, you can feel their energy, you know they're around, or if you're clairaudient like I am, you may hear them, right? But and when I say hear them, I'm talking about conversation or some words or something like this. But, the average John and Jane Doe out there, I believe, sees spirits most of the time. And I know that sounds odd for me to say that, but I feel like they're thinking that, they're seeing a solid body. And so they're thinking, oh, that's a real person. When, in fact, it's not a real person. It's a spirit that has appeared as a real person. Now, there is something called energy transfer, which a spirit can lay his or her image over a real person. So if you've ever experienced, Richard, where maybe you're walking down the street or you're inside a building and suddenly you see somebody that you know has passed on, but you look and you go, oh, my gosh, there's John Doe. And then for a moment, you see the image of John Doe, and then you blink a couple of times, and then you find out, no, that's not John Doe at all. But just for the moment, you see them clearly. And that's when a spirit can lay their energy on top of another living human being.
Is that easier for a spirit to do than to produce a full-on apparition?
I don't know if you would call it easier or not. I believe that, there's got to be enough energy in the room or the air for, let's say, electromagnetic energy for apparition to come into full view. But, an individual has plenty of energy for a spirit to lay his or her image over. What they're doing is they're stepping into the aura of that individual just long enough for somebody to see them.
I want to ask you about crows. I know there's a story in the book about crows, and I think I told this story on Coast about, very quickly, my wife going to visit a friend's father who had recently lost his wife, and his friend's mother, obviously, passed on. Mm-hmm. So she drove over to the house. They were childhood friends. She had a basket of goodies. She had baked some things for the friend's father, who was elderly and now living alone. So she reached into the trunk to pull out the basket, and all of a sudden she saw this huge crow on the roof of the house, and it was trying to get at this squirrel. And then the next moment she looked up, the crow was gone, and she heard a voice behind her. At the end of the driveway, she turned around, and this gentleman introduced himself and said, "Oh, are you here to see whatever the gentleman's name was?"
Oh,
and
wow.
She was startled. And then she just walked up to the front porch, didn't say anything, put the basket on the front porch, and was going to turn and leave. The man was gone, and the crow was back. And I think I'm probably leaving out some details, but I kind of shortened it. But what is, you've got a story about a gathering of crows. There's something going on with these birds, to be sure.
Yeah, spirits, birds are often looked at as spirit messengers. And so I feel like your story about your wife's experience was that of a spirit that got her attention, right? She saw it on the roof and it was going after a squirrel. And then, boom, suddenly you have a man behind her. So I can say that more than likely was a spirit that, took the body of the crow and then turned around and took the form of a human. And here's the thing. It could have been a neighbor, right? Could have been a neighbor guy.
Right.
And suddenly that spirit takes over that neighbor's body, and then he's gone very quickly. Or it could be just a spirit that came down and formed as a human being and then vanished again and now reappears as the crow. So, when it comes to paranormal things shift in a second, So we may be startled by how quickly things change, but in the paranormal world, that's pretty typical, right? That's
right.
typical.
So tell me about the gathering of crows in the book.
Well, I have to say that I went over to a particular client's house. She was dying. She was in stage 4 cancer. She was a nurse by profession, so she knew exactly what was going on. And she said, I want one last reading before I leave this earth. And so she had kind of opened up a sliding glass door, to get a little fresh air or a window, whatever it was. And so as I start to read, and I'm just fast-forwarding through the story very quickly, as I'm reading and I would stop, right, as soon as I would pause, these crows, and by the way, these crows came out of nowhere. She had a big tree in the backyard, and it just suddenly flooded with crows. I mean, it was like, how many crows in a 10-mile radius? A lot. And so every time I would pause in the reading, these crows would go absolutely crazy. And I didn't initially say anything to her about the crows. She brought up the crows herself. And then I would start to read, and they would go silent. And when I would pause or say, do you have any questions at this time, these crows would just sound off. And it was an amazing experience. I really do feel that spirits were there to support her. You know what I mean? They were there to support her, and they wanted to make themselves known. Now, that's not the only, that whole incident with those crows there, in and around that time, I remember my front and backyard having just thousands of crows that landed on the property. And yet none of my neighbors had a crow in it. And as soon as I saw the crows in the yard, I thought, uh-oh, this is a big sign, right? And things did fall, in a negative way shortly after those crows had shown up in my yard. So, and I'm not saying that crows are all bad messengers or anything of that nature, but they are messengers of spirits.
Right. In indigenous cultures, aren't they considered to be kind of tricksters? Or maybe that's the raven. I'm confusing. But I don't know. I think of a crow, a flock of crows. We call them a murder of crows. They do seem kind of sinister.
I don't get that from crows. I know that they have a reputation of that. And, a lot of times we see, like scary movies right, where they show the crow and there's something, in the foreboding or, presentiment of something that's going to happen. But I guess you could connect it to that, but I don't see them as here comes something demonic or every time you see a crow or the gathering of crows that it's going to be horrible. But in my case, with them coming into the yard, I knew just from the feeling of it and the sight of it, I mean, why would those crows not land in my neighbor's yard? In the front yard or the backyard. Why just mine? So to me, it was saying, "Heads up, Angela. We're here for a reason." And
Angela, we're gonna roll into the bottom of the hour here and take or on the top of the hour rather, and take a break. Angela Thomas is my guest. The book "This Psychic Life," a collection of personal stories, right here on Coast to Coast AM.